On the night of St. Patrick's Day, I stayed in. I was in bed and just couldn't sleep. I tossed and turned for what must have been hours. I kept drifting on and off, but then, suddenly, a searing pain ripped through my arm. I shot up and clutched the wound, a deep gash running down the length of my forearm. I looked up and saw my door wide open. Loud footsteps were banging down the hall, like something was running away. Someone had to be in my house. I reached for my phone to call the police, but it wasn't connected to the charger. It was gone. They must have taken it. It was at that very same moment I realized nobody was supposed to be home that night. I couldn't just sit in bed and wait to bleed out, or for whoever broke in to come back. I had to get up and do something about it. I stood up, nearly falling over. I turned my attention to the open door. I couldn't hear the footsteps anymore, but that didn't mean they were far. Quietly, I crept over and stopped just before going through, slowly leaning over to peek my head out into the hall. It was dark, though it seemed empty. But then, I heard this tortured sound. It was distant, but still in the house. The basement. It had to be. But what the hell was it? It was half like a dying animal roaring in pain and half like a person screaming. In spite of my fear, I forced myself out of the room, then carefully made my way downstairs. I started to walk to the front door, but I saw something out of the corner of my eye. The door to the basement was open. A light down there was flickering on for just fractions of a second at a time, blinking spastically. I walked to it, found the switch, and tried to turn it off, but nothing changed. The light kept on flickering. And down there, somewhere, was a quiet voice. I couldn't tell if it was crying, laughing, or whimpering, but it sounded scared. And then a thought hit me. It could be someone in my family. They could have come home early and got attacked. There was a good chance they were worse off than me. I had to go and check on them. And when I reached the bottom, I saw them. They weren't a burglar or a family member. They were something else. In the middle of the basement floor, facing away from me under the flickering light, was something I could only describe as a leprechaun. I stood there in shock. I blinked, rubbed my eyes, pinched myself, but it was still there. It looked small but not harmless, like a human, but far from healthy. Without a good look at its face, I couldn't be sure of anything. Hello? What are you doing down here? What are you... It turned to look at me over its shoulder. That thing couldn't be human. Not a chance. I felt skewered by its eyes, unable to move or speak. I couldn't even look away as it began to grow. It didn't happen naturally. The bones and flesh of this creature broke and stretched over itself again and again as it grew to match my size. It turned its body to face me directly, beginning to tower over me. It never fully stood up, but hung from one hand gripping the rafters, then reached out to me with the other. The hand wrapped around me and drew me in closer, as its jaw began to smile and unhinge itself, making room for me to fit in. I couldn't close my eyes, scream, or fight. I was completely paralyzed. The inside of its mouth with jagged teeth was the last thing I saw, right before I felt it pulsating and pushing me down with wet, rotting flesh, piercing and tearing into every inch of my body. For a brief moment, I thought I reached the bottom of the leprechaun's stomach and found it to be the same as my bedroom, like I was already in hell and doomed to repeat this over and over. But no, it couldn't be. It was just a dream, the most awful, agonizing, and haunting dream of my life. And yet, when I looked down at my arm, it wasn't bleeding anymore, but there was a mark in the same spot, a scar in the same shape as the wound. Nothing like that had ever been there before. The dream wasn't entirely unreal. Some of it had to have come with me into the real world. I didn't know what to make of it. I spoke to my neighbors about it later, expecting them to call me crazy or overdramatic, but their reaction was quite the opposite. Everyone I talked to claimed to have seen a leprechaun in the area. Some claimed it was as whimsical and harmless as you could imagine, but others shared a story similar to mine, and many encounters in between blurred the lines of what this thing could be. I don't know if it's good or evil, but I know I'm not crazy, and I know that wasn't a dream. Every St. Patrick's Day, that night is all I can think about.
I subscribed to Lily Rose's OnlyFans on a Tuesday night in March, after scrolling through my feed with nothing else to do. I was 34, lived alone, and worked as an accountant, where nobody talked about anything except spreadsheets. Her profile said she was a model who lived in the same city. We started talking a week later. Lily Rose was nothing like I expected. She hardly cared about what I could afford and was more interested in how I was. By the third week, I was checking my phone constantly, waiting for her name to appear. About a month later, she invited me over. She said she wanted to film exclusive content with someone she trusted. Her address was in a quiet suburb, and she told me she'd be waiting for me the following evening. Every rational part of my brain told me to turn her down. She might be nice, but I hardly knew her. Still, I was lonely, and Lily Rose had made me feel seen in a way nobody had in a long time. So, I went. The house was an ordinary single-story building with pale blue siding and a small porch adorned with potted plants. I rang the bell, and she answered almost immediately.
Ethan! Oh my god, please come in.
She giggled, tucking a stray strand behind her ear. I gave her an awkward smile, suddenly hyper-aware of how absolutely stunning she was. She had to be at least a decade younger than me. Inside, the living room was clean and sparsely furnished. We sat and talked for a while. All the while, my heart was doing somersaults in my chest. About 10 minutes later, she stood.
This way.
I swallowed hard and followed her down the hallway toward what I assumed was her bedroom. We were just a couple of feet from the closed door when loud footsteps echoed behind me. I turned to see an old woman standing in the kitchen doorway. She was lean and slightly stooped. Her wrinkled face resembled Lily Rose's if she were older, and her gray hair was pulled back in a tight bun.
Ethan? That's Susan, my mom.
Lily Rose muttered. All the softness and warmth from earlier had vanished. Help! Before I could finish, a cloth came over my face from behind. It was damp and reeked of a harsh chemical that burned my throat. I tried to pull away, but their grip was stronger than it should have been. My vision blurred. The last thing I saw was a blank-faced Lily Rose standing in the hallway, watching me collapse. I woke up, tied to a chair, under lights so bright they made my eyes water. My head felt like it had been split open. I looked around and realized we were in an unfinished basement, with cameras on tripods positioned around me. Susan stood in front of me, studying me as if I were a piece of furniture. Lily Rose was behind one of the cameras. The women chatted about numbers and other things as they adjusted the angles.
He's up! He's up!
Lily Rose giggled. Susan glanced over, and her grin made me sick. I opened my mouth to scream, but only a whimper came out.
Relax, love. We'll keep it as quick as possible. Unfortunately for you, they pay more when it drags out and looks real.
She said, pulling out a small blade and pressing it lightly against my forearm.
Cry for the camera.
She giggled, drawing the blade across my skin. Blood welled up and ran down my elbow. I screamed and tried to pull away. The chair tipped backward, and I hit the concrete floor hard enough to see stars. Susan sighed, as if I'd inconvenienced her, and nodded at Lily Rose, who put the camera down and came over. They hauled me in the chair upright.
Don't do that.
Susan hissed, backhanding me across the face so hard my ears rang.
Ethan, we need you conscious.
They filmed the torture for what felt like hours, using tools I'd never seen before. The mother cut me in small places on my arms, shoulders, and collarbone. It wasn't life-threatening, but enough to make me bleed and beg. All the while, Lily Rose kept filming it all. At some point, I stopped screaming and just sat there, numb, certain that death was only a couple of hours away. Just when I had given up all hope, loud banging started from somewhere upstairs. I could hear shouting and movements. Seconds later, the basement door burst open, and officers flooded the stairs with their guns drawn, shouting commands. The mother lunged for the nearest camera, but an officer grabbed her and forced her to the ground. Lily Rose just stood there frozen, still holding the camera. Someone cut the zip ties around my wrists and ankles, and an EMT wrapped something around my arm. I couldn't process what was happening. One of the officers was talking to me, but I couldn't hear him over the ringing in my ears. Later, at the hospital, a detective told me one of their neighbors reported the ladies after noticing men going into that house, but never coming out. They'd been watching for 2 weeks before they got a warrant. The search turned up more cameras, hard drives full of content I was told I didn't want to see, and a section of disturbed concrete in the basement floor. When they dug it up, they found human remains. Bodies were buried beneath right where I'd been sitting. Susan and Lily Rose were arrested. The trial lasted 6 months. I testified twice and had to watch parts of the footage. The mother got life without parole, while Lily Rose got 25 years. The prosecutor argued she'd been coerced by her mother since she was 16, but I couldn't feel sorry for her. I'm 36 now. The scars have faded, but I can still see them. I moved to a different city, started therapy 3 times a week, and deleted every social media account. Yet nothing helps me from living the horror all over in my head again and again. Each time, my imagination makes it worse.
This happened to me Wednesday night. So my boyfriend lives in the town over, and he orders me lifts back and forth to go and see him. We've been doing this for over the past 7 months without any problems. But we spent the day together and had an amazing time as always, and he ordered me a lift back home. The guy pulls up and my boyfriend puts me in the car and gives me a passionate kiss goodbye. The driver is from Cuba, hardly speaks a lick of English, and is using Google Translate the entire time to talk to me. First, it started off as, "Do you mind sitting in the front seat? I don't like for people to sit behind me." Okay, no problem. However, instead of letting me out of the car, he asks me to climb over the seat, which made me feel a bit uncomfortable, and then I realized that he was staring at me the whole time that I'm doing so. Then he proceeds to tell me, "I hope I'm not being too daring, but you're very beautiful." Okay, cool, I get this compliment all the time, so I say thank you, but I'm a bit put off by this, to be honest. He goes on like a regular driver, asking me if the music was okay, and the volume and all that, you know, the regular stuff. Then he starts asking me about the address that I'm going to. "Am I taking you to your home?" I reply, "Yes, I'm going home." He then asks, "Can I go home with you?" I laugh at this and say no. He asks about the guy that put me in the car, if he was my boyfriend or my husband. He's my boyfriend, my soon-to-be husband. He asks, "Can I be your boyfriend too?" I say absolutely not. He asks why not. I say that I'm totally against that I'm in love with my boyfriend very much, and that I'm extremely loyal and faithful to him. He says he doesn't have to know. In Cuba, we believe in having multiple partners, and not all of them know about each other. And I say, well, that's definitely not a thing for me. I don't believe in that one bit. He says, "Your boyfriend makes the mistake of sending you home alone. I would have taken you myself to make sure you got there safe." I'm getting very upset at this point, and I'm only laughing at what he says, trying to maintain a friendly composure because I know how ugly things could turn if I start giving this guy attitude. He doesn't speak again for a while, and when he does, he asks me again if he could come home with me. I tell him no again, and he says, "You're so beautiful, I really want to be your other boyfriend." I don't even say anything but shake my head no and start fidgeting with my phone. He tells me that he has a lot of money and that he would take care of me. I told him that I didn't care about that and that I wasn't interested. He asks if he could give me his number so that we could text each other, and I say no. After what seemed like an eternity, we pull up to my house and he gets down trying to help me with my bags. I decline his help and he tells me, hold on, and pulls out his phone one more time and asks, can I come inside with you? I tell him have a good night and to have a safe trip back, and dart inside as fast as I could, locking all the doors behind me, calling my boyfriend immediately so that he could report this weirdo because I don't want this unpleasant experience to happen to anybody else. In the end, though, the only thing Lyft did was give my boyfriend a $5 credit to his account for the unpleasant experience. He wasn't even able to tell him. He really wasn't even able to tell them why it was so unpleasant. And look, I know, stories like this aren't actually the scariest or creepiest ones out there, but if you were a young woman and in a stranger's car like this, and they were pressing like this and trying to come into your home and everything, trust me, going through something like this is actually pretty terrifying. So yes, ladies, creepy drivers are definitely a thing, and please, be careful out there. So I'm a man living alone in an apartment, for reference. I was walking into my building this evening and a lady that I've never talked to before and rarely even seen said hello. I'm personable and polite, so I said hello back and went to walk into the building. Then she asked how I was and how the weekend was going. I assumed it was just some friendly small talk, so I obliged, and then immediately she asked where I worked and how long I've lived in the building for, which threw me a little bit but seemed innocent enough. Then, about as soon as I finished answering, she said, no one has ever helped me or offered me help my whole life, and I'm just trying to better myself, but nobody will help. People don't ask me to go out and do any fun things, and I like to do fun things. So I just kind of stammered something about how that's rough or whatever. Again, immediately once I stopped talking, she started up the same thread, a bit frustrated and exasperated. I don't have any friends. No one offers help. I'm just a nice person. I'm paraphrasing, but that was basically it. This whole time she's like barely blinking though, won't break eye contact and is kind of cornering me as well. My hair on the back of my neck is up and my skin is crawling, and my super came out and said that she needed me for something and got me inside. She then told me that I really shouldn't be talking to her. I said that I thought maybe she was just lonely and socially inept, but she said to avoid her. Women like this seem to have a good instinct about dangerous or unhinged people, so I plan on following her advice, but as someone with friends on the spectrum and having worked with the mentally disabled in my life, I at first thought that maybe it was just that. Now, it's been a few hours and honestly, I still cannot shake this uneasy feeling. I thought that I would ask anybody here if they knew what this might be, or maybe if this is ringing any bells or setting alarms off for anyone, because I don't want to treat someone who is just eccentric as a pariah, undeservedly too. But honestly though, I would be lying if I didn't say that my gut is screaming for me to be careful.
I am Olivia Bennett, and this happened about 7 months after I moved out because I thought independence would make me stronger. I'd always wanted to study medicine, and living alone felt like the kind of sacrifice serious people made. Most nights, Instagram was the only thing that reminded me I wasn't living under a rock, so I was pretty active on Instagram. The follow request came at around 11:30 on a Wednesday night while I was studying for a biology exam at my desk. The account was @Emily. It looked like a bot account because it didn't have a profile picture, posts, or followers. I should have declined it immediately, but I was 19, tired, and hardly thinking straight, and I'd gotten dozens of random follow requests that week from people starting new accounts or bots or whatever. I accepted it without a second thought and went back to my notes on cellular respiration. Seconds later, my phone buzzed. @Emily had posted a story. I tapped it, more out of curiosity than anything else. The image loaded, and my stomach dropped. It was unmistakably my house. The photo was taken from the street, but my bedroom window was visible on the second floor. The curtains were open, and the lights were on. And if you squinted closely enough, you could see my shadow under the glow of the desk lamp beside the edge of my bookshelf. Before I could wrap my head around it, a message came through. "You should turn that off now, Olivia." My hands started shaking and my mouth went dry. I hurriedly got up from my desk, turned off the lamp, and closed the curtains. My room went dark, except for the glow from my laptop screen. I stood there in the darkness, trying to process what was happening. Right then, my phone buzzed again. @Emily had posted another story. I opened it with my heart hammering in my chest and nearly screamed. The story refreshed. It was my house again, but from the inside this time. The photo was taken low to the ground, like someone was crouched in my hallway with the camera pointed straight at my bedroom door. My chest tightened. They were inside my house, close enough to move through it, take photos, and post them while I stood frozen in my dark room, afraid to make a sound. I hurriedly ran and locked my bedroom door before grabbing my phone and dialing 911. I kept pressing my head against the door to listen for sounds as the call connected and the operator answered. I whispered that someone was in my house. She told me to find a place to hide and stay on the line. I crawled into my closet, pulled the door shut, and sat there in the dark with my phone pressed to my ear and my free hand over my mouth to keep myself from making noise. I could hear soft shuffling in the hallway, followed by a low giggle that made my stomach twist. The operator kept talking to me while she told me the police were on their way, and I stayed curled up in that closet, counting my breaths and flinching at every sound the house made. At some point, I checked Instagram again. The account had gone offline, but hadn't taken the photos down. By the time the police arrived, I was sobbing so hard I could hardly speak straight. An officer consoled me while another searched the entire house. They found my back door unlocked, but everything else was in its rightful place. They took my phone and looked at the Instagram account. @Emily was still there, but both stories had expired. One officer took screenshots anyway and asked if I knew anyone named Emily. I told them I didn't. They filed a report and told me to change my locks and install cameras. One officer suggested I stay somewhere else for a few days. I called my parents and they drove over to get me at 2 in the morning. I never set foot in that house again. My parents moved my stuff out over the next week while I stayed with them. We put the house on the market a month later. I completed pre-med and chose a university in another state. I will graduate in 6 months, but the cops have yet to trace them. I don't think they ever will. The @Emily account disappeared completely the next day, as if it had never existed. They tracked the IP address to a public library 3 towns over, but the security footage from that night had already been recorded over by the time they checked. I have tried putting it past me and moving on, but the episode still lingers somewhere in the back of my mind. And I can't help but replay the night over and over in my head. Who were they? What did they want? How did they know exactly where my house and room were? I wonder if they're still out there and have found someone else to follow. Someone whose bedroom window is visible from the street and who accepts follow requests from blank accounts at 11:30 at night without thinking twice.
I was just 18 years old when this happened. On my first St. Patty's Day as an adult, the girls and I went out for drinks, dressed in green, and partied past midnight. I couldn't have asked for a better time with them, but eventually, we had to go home. Being responsible, we took the train. The streets were already dead by the time we decided to make our way to the subway station. Once underground, we boarded the last train of the night together. We were still lit as we got moving. Each of us lived within walking distance of that same line, but at different stops along the way. Some of us got off in small groups or in pairs, while others left alone, promising to text the group chat as soon as they made it home. One by one, our group dwindled. The train grew quieter, emptier. I was one of the last girls off. I left alone, waving goodbye to the few remaining friends that had stayed with me. The station was a ghost town. I got out of there quickly. I couldn't believe how late we had stayed out. Every intersection I passed was cornered by more empty streets and lifeless sidewalks. And just as I was getting comfortable with the feeling of being so alone, I was not. Close to my apartment, the street was now completely empty except for a single car parked on the curb. The lights were off, but as I got near it, I could hear music coming from inside. It wasn't upbeat music though. It sounded old and out of key. The car was even parked the wrong way, facing me on the same side of the street I was on. Despite everything odd about the car and how dark out it was, I didn't change course. That would only make me cross directly in front of it, which didn't feel any better than walking past it. So I decided to just step a few feet to the side and mind my business. As I walked past the car, the window slowly rolled down. Chills ran down my spine and I started to panic. I averted my eyes and picked up the pace, not wanting to make eye contact. I managed to walk past the car without being catcalled, but then a moment later, I heard the door open. There was no other car on the street. It had to be the same one, but I didn't turn my head to make sure. I just had to keep my cool.
Don't look back, don't engage. You just had a little too much to drink, and they're probably way drunker than you. So just stop being paranoid and...
If I had looked back, I would have seen how close he got and how soon he closed the gap. I just didn't expect it. I never thought people would actually be so evil. My optimism didn't help me. The man kept me silent with a vice grip around my throat and dragged me all the way back to his car. By the time he took me there, I was so close to passing out I didn't have the strength to fight back. He had already overpowered me, and in that state, there was nothing I could do.
Relax! Your Uber's here!
Let me go!
Just get in there!
Let me out of here! I'm being abducted!
Shut up! The louder you get, the worse shit I'm gonna do to you!
I don't care! Let me out!
You're already gonna beg for mercy, bitch! Would you rather beg for death?
You're a piece of shit! I hope you crash!
I'll make you wish you never stepped foot outside on St. Paddy's Day!
I was in full-blown panic mode. I couldn't think. I just acted on every impulse. Even though the door hadn't opened the last 20 times I tried, I kept pulling the handle as hard as I could. Suddenly, it gave way. The door opened, and I tumbled out without even trying. I rolled across the asphalt over and over, finally skidding to a stop in the middle of the road. My injuries and the pain that came with them should have knocked the wind out of me, made me sit there in agony. But adrenaline is a hell of a thing. I got up without skipping a beat, then started sprinting in the opposite direction. I ran and ran until I plowed into a random man walking the street. He was drunk and confused, probably almost as scared as I was, but he called the police and ushered me to a 24/7 store where I could be safe. Soon, the authorities came, took me to the hospital to get treated, and wrote down my statement. I gave them every detail I could remember. The man's age, his hair, his glasses, his car, but sadly, it wasn't enough. When he kept going after I fell out of his car, that was the last I ever heard or saw of him. He was never found, ever since then. St. Paddy's Day triggers this traumatic memory, and at the first thought of going out, my brain forces me to relive this story, the story of how I was almost kidnapped.
I rented the cabin because I wanted silence. After the breakup, silence felt like the only thing that might fix me. No friends checking in, no city noise, and no reminders of him packed into every corner of my apartment. All I had was snow, trees, and a week to myself to clear my mind. The listing warned about limited cell service and heavy winter conditions, but I welcomed that. I told myself I would leave early if the weather turned awful. the snow turned bad faster than expected. By the second night, the road I had driven in on was completely buried. The world outside the cabin appeared sealed shut when I woke up the next morning. Thick snow piled against the porch steps, and the trees bowed under its weight. My phone showed no signal. The radio crackled but offered nothing useful. I felt a flicker of unease, but I told myself this was what I came for. Suddenly, I noticed a snowman. It stood near the tree line, far enough back that I almost missed it. It was tall and uneven, built crudely, with no face and no decorations. What bothered me was the location. People would not drag snow that far from the cabin to build one, especially with an unclear path leading to it. I checked the ground around it. There were no footprints, no tracks, nothing disturbed the snow at all. I laughed it off, convincing myself it had been there before I arrived and that the snowfall had simply covered the tracks. Still, I kept glancing toward it while I made breakfast. Something about it felt intentional, like it had been placed there to be seen. That night, just after midnight, I heard tapping. It was soft at first, almost polite. Tap, tap, tap. I sat up in bed, heart racing, staring at the dark window. Snow brushed against the glass as the wind picked up, and I told myself that was all it was. Branches, ice. My imagination was spiraling because I was alone. The tapping stopped. I barely slept. The next morning, the snowman was closer. Now it stood halfway between the trees and the cabin. The distance it had moved was impossible to ignore. I put on my boots and stepped outside, my breath fogging the air as I circled it from a distance. The snow around it was still pristine. No signs of movement, no trail, just smooth white ground leading up to its base. I felt stupid for being scared of something so harmless. That night, the tapping came again. This time it was louder, more deliberate. It moved from one window to another, slow and methodical, like someone walking around the cabin. I stayed frozen under my blankets, barely breathing, until it stopped. I did not check outside. On the third day, the snowman stood just beyond the porch. I could see it clearly through the front window. Its shape looked more defined now, tighter packed. I noticed something dark near its center, like shadows trapped beneath the surface. I tried calling for help again, but my phone remained useless. The radio only hissed back at me. Anger finally outweighed fear. I grabbed the shovel from the porch and marched toward the snowman, my boots crunching loudly against the snow. I raised the shovel and brought it down hard, splitting the top section apart. Snow collapsed in chunks, and something tumbled free onto the ground. A scarf. It was stiff with ice, patterned with faded red stripes. I recognized the texture immediately, because I owned one just like it. Beneath it, a glove fell loose, fingers curled as if they had frozen that way. As I struck again, strands of dark hair slid out, clumped together and tangled. I dropped the shovel and backed away, nausea rising in my throat. These were not decorations. They were belongings. I ran back into the cabin and locked the door, shaking so badly I could barely hold my phone. That night, I pushed furniture against the bedroom door and kept the lights on. I told myself morning would come and I would leave no matter what the road looked like. At exactly 12:16 a.m., the tapping started. It was right outside my bedroom window. I turned my head slowly, every muscle screaming at me to not look. The curtain shifted slightly, as if brushed by something heavy. The tapping continued, slower now, each knock deliberate. When I forced myself to look, I saw it. A second snowman stood inches from the glass. This one was smaller, compacted tightly, its surface smoother. Pressed into its chest was a frozen clump of hair, positioned like it was meant to be seen. I screamed and collapsed against the wall, sobbing until my throat burned. The tapping did not stop until dawn. When the sky finally lightened, I left. I forced my car through the snow until the tires caught the road beneath. I did not stop driving until I reached town and collapsed into the first cafe I saw. 3 days later, I looked it up. A woman had gone missing near the cabin the previous winter. She was last seen driving up alone after a breakup. Search teams never found her body. They never found her clothes either. I still think about that second snowman. Could it be a sign from her murderer that he had been observing me all along?
I'm writing this just after getting back from a road trip during the holidays, while everything is still fresh. This wasn't too long of a trip, but mostly on a straight stretch of road with nothing around. To make everything work with my schedule, doing the drive back home overnight was my best option. The first several hours from 7 p.m. to probably 12 were very boring and uneventful. By that time of night, I was the only car on the road, and being fully dark out, the whole highway looked the same for every mile. It was exhaustingly boring. At some point around then, a single car's headlights came into view, way down the road, going in the other direction. This highway was so straight and empty that I noticed it 2 or 3 minutes before it actually got close and passed by. I didn't really pay all that much attention to it, but it was the only other thing on the road. After it passed, I happened to do another round of checking my mirrors and saw bright red brake lights from that other car. It had noticeably slowed down and switched lanes. Then it suddenly did a U-turn. There were no designated U-turn areas though, and the two sides of the highway were separated by a grassy ditch. This car drove down into the ditch and then up onto my direction of the road, then started driving up behind me. I thought this person was crazy, but also thought they must have really needed to turn around for some reason, and was waiting for them to speed past me. They did pick up speed. However, once they got close to me, they slowed and matched my speed, staying right behind me. I was sure there was no way this person saw me on the other side of the highway and had done all of this because of me. But as the minutes went on, and this car didn't switch lanes, I got a little nervous. And then he started flickering his headlights, flashing his high beams like he was trying to communicate something to me. There was no one else around he possibly could have been signaling to. We were the only two cars on the road, so I knew he was doing it to get my attention, which kind of freaked me out. It wasn't just a couple flashes either, like signaling a cop was nearby. He kept doing it for miles. I wasn't really sure what to do here. I couldn't see what the hell this guy wanted from me, or why he was doing any of this. Also, with his headlights and how dark it was, I couldn't actually see his car. I had no way of getting a description of it. After a while, I passed a sign for a rest area in 3 miles. I figured this was my chance to pull off in an area where other cars were around, and hopefully let this guy just continue down the road and leave me alone. Even if the other cars at the rest stop were just people sleeping, it would still feel way safer. When the exit finally showed up, I pulled off the highway. It wasn't what I expected at all though. I had never seen a rest stop like this. The exit ramp spiraled down and went under the highway, through a sort of tunnel I guess, and then to the rest area. So instead of there being 2 separate pull-offs on either side of the highway, there was just this one large area that both sides were connected to. And like I said, I went under the highway, so the rest area was actually sort of at the bottom of a hill off the highway. It felt very isolating. You couldn't see or even hear anything from the road above, which I assume was the whole point. More concerning though, no other cars were there. The whole parking lot was empty. I checked my rearview mirror first, not seeing any headlights, then decided to pull into a spot right near the building. The guy following me was pretty close behind me, so not seeing his headlights made me pretty sure he didn't catch the exit. I kept checking the entrance to the rest stop, and after a minute, I finally took a deep breath and felt so relieved. Now there, parked at a rest stop, I realized just how tired I was, especially after all of that going on. The building looked like it had bathrooms and a vending machine, so I figured I should go in while I was there. I got out, locked my car, and walked inside. I was only in there for maybe a minute or two. I was going to get something from the vending machine on my way out to help me refuel, but it was out of commission. As soon as I left the building, though, I saw another car. Despite this massive rest stop being entirely empty, it was parked oddly just one space away from mine. I felt my heart sink and my stomach tighten. I had no real way to know if it was the same car that was following me, but in my gut, I was absolutely sure of it. Its windows were tinted, and the brights were still on, so between the glare and everything, I couldn't see who was inside of it. I walked slowly up to my car, getting in and having that feeling that eyes were on me. I wasted no time putting my keys in the ignition and starting the car to leave. Or trying to. The car wouldn't start. It wouldn't even try to start. Turning the key did nothing. Instantly, I felt adrenaline coming through as I realized the real danger I was now stuck in. I stared at my useless keys dangling from the ignition for a moment, feeling this surreal, out-of-body sense, just completely unable to process that I was in this situation, knowing how likely awful this was going to end up. I got my phone out and dialed 911, sure the person in the car would see and immediately get out to break into my car, knowing that I couldn't go anywhere. I was scared to even look to my side. My voice was shaky, telling the operator where I was and that I was stuck and my car wouldn't start. But once I mentioned that the car that was next to me had been following me, the woman on the other line suddenly talked faster and asked for more details, like she was suddenly a little more worried and rushing, or had heard of something similar before. I told her everything, and she had police on the way 10 minutes out. I still hadn't even looked to the car next to me, scared of what I'd see. But then the car slowly started to back out. They slowly pulled away, and then moved their car directly behind mine. The side of their car had to be just a couple of feet from my back bumper, and then they stopped, blocking me in. Few seconds later, I heard a door open. I saw movement in my mirror, and when I looked, I saw a tall man in a dark brown winter jacket slowly approaching the side of my car. He came right up to the window, hovering over me. I was terrified, again scared to even look at him, but I felt his disturbing presence right on the other side of my window, quietly staring in at me. The man didn't speak or try to open the door. He just stood there. I continued telling the woman on the phone what was happening. After a minute, the man slowly moved around my car, passing by the front and going to the other side. I don't know if he was looking inside for something or what, but he walked around it several times. Then he walked back to his car, got in, and slowly drove away. I watched his headlights go through the tunnel and disappear. 5 minutes later, an officer pulled into the rest stop. He quickly got information from me and told me another officer was a few minutes out that would help me with my car, but after being sure I was okay, he seemed to be more in a hurry to chase down the guy that was following me. It turned out the man had cut the ignition cable from my battery, which I didn't even know was a thing that someone could do so easily. I was able to get towed out safely and had it repaired in the morning. I called multiple times for updates from the police station, but got nothing. It really felt like something more was going on, from the way the operator suddenly sounded rushed and worried, and the officer wanting to chase him down immediately. And overall, I couldn't figure out what that guy wanted from me. He followed me for miles, flashing his lights, then cut my ignition and had me stranded in an isolated rest stop with no one around. But he didn't do anything. He just creepily and eerily walked around my car. I'm wondering if anyone knows what he might have been doing, or had something similar happen. Again, this was only a few days ago, so there's still a chance something else comes from it. I'll let you know and provide an update if anything significant is found out.
I want to start by saying that I'm not someone who scares easily. I grew up with 3 older brothers. I've worked graveyard shifts at gas stations. And I've always been the person in the friend group who laughs at jump scares in horror movies. I tell you this because what I'm about to describe shook me in a way that took months to work through, and I want you to understand that it's not because I'm dramatic. I was 19 when I started babysitting for a woman named Renee. She had 2 kids, a 9-year-old boy named Marcus and a 6-year-old girl named Lily. They lived in a quiet suburban neighborhood, about 15 minutes from my apartment, in one of those subdivisions where every house looks almost identical and the streets are wide and empty after dark. Renee was a nurse working evening shifts at a hospital across town, so I'd arrive around 5 and stay until she got home, usually sometime between 11 and midnight. Marcus was a quiet, serious kid who liked building things with Legos and reading graphic novels. Lily was the opposite, loud, imaginative, constantly inventing games that somehow always ended with me chasing her around the house. I liked both of them. I'd been working for Renee for about 4 months, and genuinely felt comfortable there. The night it happened was a Wednesday in late October. Not Halloween, not that it would matter. But I mention it because the nights had gotten longer and darker earlier, and the neighborhood always felt a little more isolated once the sun went down in autumn. I'd made the kids grilled cheese for dinner, helped Lily through a bath, and was getting her settled when Marcus said something I initially brushed off. There was a man looking in the backyard window earlier. I looked up from tucking Lily's blanket. What do you mean? He shrugged, that practiced 9-year-old shrug that means they're trying to seem unbothered. When you were giving Lily her bath, I was in the living room and thought I saw someone standing on the back porch, looking through the glass. I asked if he was sure, and he said he wasn't, said it was dark and it might have been his own reflection. I told him it probably was, locked the back sliding door, which I had assumed was already locked, and tried to move on, but I checked that door twice more before I put Marcus to bed at 9:30. By 10 o'clock, I was alone on the couch, television on low, and I was starting to feel that particular kind of quiet that settles into a house after kids fall asleep. The kind of quiet where you start noticing sounds you didn't notice before, the refrigerator humming, the occasional creak from upstairs, and then something else. It was subtle at first, a sound I couldn't immediately categorize. Not a creak, not the house settling, something more deliberate. Like the slow, careful weight of footsteps trying very hard not to be footsteps, coming from the direction of the kitchen. I muted the television. Nothing. Silence. I told myself it was the fridge. I unmuted the TV. It happened again 10 minutes later, and this time I was certain it wasn't the fridge. It had rhythm. It had intention. I sat completely still on the couch and stared at the darkened hallway leading to the kitchen, and I felt something shift in my chest. That animal awareness, the part of your brain that predates language, telling you something is wrong. I got up and turned on the hallway light. The kitchen was empty, but the stool at the kitchen island was pulled out. Not far, maybe 8 inches. I was almost certain it had been pushed in when I made dinner. I always push the stools back in. It was a compulsive habit of mine. Almost certain isn't the same as certain, though, so I talked myself down. I went back to the couch. Then I noticed the glass. There was a glass on the counter near the sink, a clear drinking glass with maybe 2 inches of water in it. I hadn't poured that glass. I had given the kids juice with dinner, and I had been drinking from a water bottle I brought with me. I stood there staring at it for what felt like a long time, and I could feel my own heartbeat in my throat. I called Renee. She picked up on the 3rd ring, and I kept my voice low and even. I told her what Marcus had said, what I'd heard, the stool and the glass. There was a pause on her end that lasted too long. Then she said, "Is the back door locked right now?" I said yes. She said, "Check the garage." I asked her why, and she said her ex-husband, Marcus's father, not Lily's, the one she left 2 years ago and had a restraining order against, had a garage door code she'd never gotten around to changing. She said she'd been getting hang-up calls from blocked numbers all week and hadn't thought much of it. She was speaking faster now. I was already moving toward the interior garage door, and she told me not to open it, to take the kids out through the front door and go to a neighbor's house and call 911. I didn't make it to the garage door, because as I turned toward the hallway, I heard the door to the garage click. Not open, just the latch releasing. as though someone on the other side had their hand on the knob and had just decided to stop. I dropped the phone and I moved. I don't fully remember getting up the stairs. I remember grabbing Marcus from his bed and being surprised by how awake he was, like some part of him was waiting. I got Lily up, got both of them out the front door, left it wide open behind us, and ran 3 houses down to a neighbor I recognized. We were inside a stranger's kitchen when we heard Renee's front door slam shut from down the street. The police came. Renee came 40 minutes later, still in her scrubs. And I remember her hugging the kids in the neighbor's driveway while 2 officers walked through her house with flashlights. They found the water glass. They found scuff marks near the garage that suggested someone had been standing in that narrow space between the car and the wall for some time. One of the officers told me, quietly, that whoever was in there had been in there for a while. I thought about all the sounds I dismissed, all the minutes I'd sat 10 feet from that garage door, watching television, not knowing. They never confirmed it was Renee's ex. No cameras, no prints that meant anything. He denied it. The restraining order was reviewed and strengthened, for whatever that's worth. What I keep coming back to, even now, is Marcus. He saw someone at that back window and told me, clearly, calmly. The way a 9-year-old has already learned to manage fear tells an adult something important. And I locked the door and changed the subject. He knew something was wrong before I did. He'd probably known something was wrong for much longer than that. I don't babysit anymore. I don't say that to be dramatic. I just don't think I'm suited for it. For that particular responsibility of being the last line of protection for someone else's children in a house that isn't mine. In a situation I don't fully understand. Some quiet houses aren't empty. That's the thing nobody tells you until you've already learned it.
This happened in Antioch, California. It was around 2 a.m. I was at a friend's house, safe in warm sheltered suburbia. We were having a lot to drink, chit-chatting and enjoying ourselves. Of course, when you're having fun, time hits the fast forward button and those few minutes turn into an hour. I had too much to drink. My friend has a bit an abrupt bedtime, so I had to dodge out early, still intoxicated. I felt too shameful thinking I'd be asking too much to stay in his house to sleep off the drunkenness. I suppose he was either too rude or too drunk to consider it himself. Whatever. Sometimes a little inconvenience makes you appreciate everything else, right? I needed about an hour or so to sober up and drive back. As fast as time passed during my stay, it decided to drastically slow down as soon as I stepped out of his house. It was a cul-de-sac area, a concrete jungle with the stem of the street light breaking into a fork. Alongside the road, my car was parked. The only street light that worked was in the middle of the cul-de-sac circle, about 80 yards away. Stumbled towards my car, produced my keys, felt the metal lineup, opened my door, and shifted to the back seat. Because this was a dark, strange, and unfamiliar neighborhood, I took the leftover newspapers and a sweater in my back seat to cover myself up. I was a little scared. I wanted to camouflage myself and not be just some guy awkwardly sitting in his car waiting for time to pass in order to drive home. I couldn't fall asleep. The uncomfortable feeling of a cheap backseat bed enshrouded in darkness didn't make the chance of slumber easier. It felt too ominous. And of course, my mind began to wander. I thought of worst-case scenarios. Like how the police would shine their lights on me through the window or a drunk driver hitting my car, and... wait. In the distance, about 100 yards away, I could hear footsteps approaching. The gravel scuffed with each step forward, growing in proximity but periodically taking stops. I wondered why until it made sense in my mind. Whoever it was probably looking through cars carefully, with the intent to steal one. I couldn't recall how many cars were on the block, but I counted 3 full stops until he was at my window breathing. I froze. There was no more than 1 foot between us now. The car encapsulated me as I lay hidden beneath backseat clutter, forming myself into an object, trying my hardest to be unnoticeable, unmoving, and simply not there. "I see you," said a 40-plus-year-old man in a perverse baby talk. Imagine when you were playing hide and seek and one of your friends tricks you into coming out. He said it in that tone of voice, as if baiting me, like he was questioning whether the clutter in the back seat was just clutter or a person. I didn't want to move or check the window. I remained cluttered. "Give me an Academy Award," My body reacted by minimizing my breathing so much that I felt paralyzed. I dare not look, my eyes fixated on the back of the passenger seat. I didn't blink, I didn't move, and I didn't breathe really. My heart was pounding so hard it shook my body with each throb. He circled around the car. My ears didn't fail me. I heard the steps. I felt like I was part of the car. I could feel him touching the trunk as he carefully pressed down on it, as if to test the alarm or to test me. I was in the middle of fight or flight. I couldn't do either without elevating danger. I was frozen, hoping that he was bluffing. He circled the car again, and the door handle to my right jiggled. He was pulling it multiple times. "I see you." Same tone, but more agitated and stressed. More convinced that he was trying to make that clutter move, revealing it to be of his expectations that it was me. My muscles tensed like a cow before slaughter. Tap, 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 tap. That had to be metal against glass. Take a penny right now and tap your window. A crowbar, a knife, a rock, a gun. My eyes fixated on the seat in front of me, never averting my gaze like he was. I was covered enough to where I couldn't see beyond the seat in front of me. I know I couldn't see him, but I could feel his eyes resting on top of me. "My name is Pokerface. What's your name?" The voice changed in a lower, demented, and serious tone. My mind forced a visual. It wasn't anything human. I already accepted my death. I was ready to be shot in the head, ready to take a life-changing bullet and have multiple knife wounds. Just make this sleep bearable, not excruciating, as you drain me out of life. I wouldn't know how to react. My thoughts grew dimmer. I imagined my friend waking up the next morning after a calm night of safe and sound sleep, only to discover my mutilated, defiled, and bloodied body hanging outside my car door. It was then that I heard nothing but my own heart. What was this person doing now? Just staring at me in the middle of the night? Talking to me, or a messy pile in the back seat? Time froze. The footsteps were being swallowed in the distance. Thankfully, he left. I waited another hour until the sun showed hints of itself. I jumped in my front seat and bolted out of there, wide-eyed and sober enough.
Hello, my name is Heather, and this story took place a few years ago. I often stayed home alone for a couple of hours, but this particular night my parents were out of town for the weekend, and it was the first time I had to sleep alone with no one else in the house. This didn't bother me though, because I had just finished a stressful report for school that took a whole week, and I was ready to relax. My parents left at around 8 p.m. that night, and I decided to put a movie on and eat some pizza. It started raining heavily out of nowhere, and when this happened, my parents always told me to go outside and pull the pool cover out and over the pool. This was because if we didn't, the pool would overflow. Anyway, I was kind of nervous to go do it because it had already gotten dark outside, and behind my house was a forest where wild animals often came out at night. I decided to wait the rain out to see if it would stop, but after 20 minutes, it didn't. I sighed, then decided to put my fear aside and go to the backyard. I turned on all the deck lights and walked toward the pool. That's when I noticed something weird. The pool was already halfway covered. I was confused. It had only started raining 20 minutes ago, and I didn't think it was covered when my parents left, so why was it covered now? I tried to convince myself it was the wind, but deep down, I knew it couldn't have been. The cover has to be manually adjusted. Still not convinced it was the wind, I approached the pool with caution and continued to cover it. Then suddenly, I heard a noise. It wasn't anything crazy, nothing more than a branch swaying in the wind, but I was already on edge, so I noticed it right away. As I looked into the darkness of the trees, that's when I noticed a flash of light. It was very quick, like whoever was holding the flashlight realized I was looking. This made me extremely nervous, so I quickly ran back inside, locked the doors, and went to my room. Since my room faced the backyard, I made sure to keep the deck lights on so I could look through my window and see if anyone was there. I began trying to calm my mind down, so I started knitting in my room while periodically checking my window to see if there was any movement. After about an hour, my mind calmed down and I stopped checking as much. Then, just one last time, I looked out of my window and saw that the pool cover had come off again. This time, it did look like the wind could have pushed it backward, so I went outside once again and covered it. The rainstorm had slowed down, so I knew this was probably the last time I had to do it. After a couple of hours, I decided it was time for bed. I double-checked all the locks and made sure the alarm system was on. If you're wondering why I didn't turn the alarm on before, it's because it's an automatic system that turns on every night at 11 p.m. I turned off all the deck lights except one, the motion sensor light. At this point, my parents had called to check in, but I didn't want to worry them, so I just told them that everything was okay, which technically it was. There had been no movement in the forest so far. Then I went to sleep. I woke up at around 2 a.m. because the motion sensor light turned on. I slowly got up from my bed and peeked out my window, which was right above it. As my vision adjusted, to my confusion, I noticed the pool cover was off again. Was this some kind of sick joke? Did whoever was doing this just want to keep me coming outside? I looked into the distance, but saw no lights or movement. I went outside again, this time with a knife, and walked up to the pool to cover it. That's when I noticed it. To my horror, there was someone inside my pool. For context, even with the cover on, there was still enough room for someone to comfortably breathe. They were dressed in all black, with a hoodie on in the farthest corner of the pool. I was in shock. Then suddenly, they started swimming extremely fast toward the ladder, which was right in front of me. And when I say fast, I mean unnaturally fast. I screamed, stupidly dropped my knife, and ran inside. As I was locking the door, the person, who I now realized was a man, ran up to the glass sliding doors and started banging on them with the knife. I was horrified. I called the police right away and hid in my bathroom until they arrived. My parents came home shortly after and informed me they had actually covered the pool completely before they left. So the man had been lurking in my backyard for even longer than I had thought. The police caught the man and arrested him. They later informed my family that the man was homeless and had previously been a professional swimmer who had won a lot of medals. This made sense considering how fast he swam. Anyway, this happened to me a few years ago, and I still can't look at pools the same. Even now, when I recall the moment that man started swimming toward me at full speed, I still get goosebumps.
When I was 13, I had a babysitter that would come once a week, as my mom would work late every Saturday night. I always thought I was too old to have a babysitter still, and hated having to have someone watch over me all the time. The main person my mom would have over was a 20-year-old guy, Thomas, that was the son of one of my mom's work friends. This guy was really weird, and I didn't like him at all. He didn't talk much and just acted really awkward and strange, but whenever he interacted with my mom, he would act extra nice and talkative. I would bring it up with her, but she'd always say I was just trying to get rid of him so I could be alone. Anyways, it was a normal Saturday night, and Thomas had just arrived, a little late as usual. My mom talked with him for a little bit and then headed to work. I walked over to the couch and turned on my Xbox to play some video games just to pass the time. I'd usually go to bed at 10, so I'd have to spend 4 or 5 hours with Thomas. Most of the time, I'd find something to do alone, because he'd never really talk to me and would just hang out in the kitchen or in our loft area. And today was no different. He stayed in the kitchen for a little bit, and after a few minutes, I heard him talking to someone. I tried to listen as best I could, but I couldn't make out what he was saying. The kitchen was right behind the living room that I was in, but he was talking really quietly. He went on for a few minutes, and then the talking stopped, followed by him coming into the living room and standing next to the couch. I looked up at him and saw he was holding his phone. Thomas said someone was going to come over, just for a second, and not to worry. I didn't really know how to respond other than to just say, okay. It was pretty weird though, and I knew it was definitely not something any babysitter should do, but I also knew that there was nothing I could really do about it. The next 20 minutes were really awkward, as he didn't take out his phone or anything. He just sat there on the couch with me, looking around and not saying anything. He would rarely ever be in the same room as me, so this was pretty out of the ordinary. Our living room was right by the front door though, so I guess he was just waiting for the person to get here. Eventually, a car pulled into the driveway and a man came knocking at the door. Thomas shot up and went over to the door, then stood right in front of it for a moment before turning to me and telling me that he'd be back in just a minute. Then he opened the door and walked outside and shut the door behind him. This whole situation had me curious as to what was going on with him. The blinds on the windows were cracked open just enough for me to see the two of their shadows as they moved around in the driveway. I could tell that the man handed Thomas a large bag and then got in his car and drove away. A few seconds later, I heard the lid of the garbage can outside slam shut, followed by Thomas coming back inside through the front door. The whole interaction seemed odd, and I couldn't help myself from asking him what it was all about. Thomas replied, telling me that it was just his friend and that he left his wallet at his friend's house last night, so he was just dropping it off. I could tell there was something wrong with the way he answered, and it didn't explain the large bag I saw him holding, but I didn't want to question him any further, so I just said okay and went back to playing my game. But things got a lot more strange as the night progressed. During the next hour, I could hear Thomas having multiple phone calls with someone in the kitchen, and at one point, he went into the far loft area where I could hear him raising his voice. Still though, I couldn't make any sense of what he was saying. After maybe the 5th or 6th call, the same car from earlier pulled into the driveway again, and Thomas immediately ran outside without saying anything. I could tell from their body language and the way that they were moving around that they were clearly arguing about something. Then Thomas left for 30 seconds, and then came back with the bag from earlier. The man took it and put it in his back seat, then drove off in a hurry. Thomas came back inside, and I could see the frustration on his face. He went over to the kitchen and didn't come back until 10, when he told me I had to go to bed. I got ready and laid in bed, while Thomas stayed downstairs. He would usually stay until my mom got home at 12, but just a few minutes later I heard the front door open and close. I waited for 10 minutes, then got up and went downstairs to see if he was still there, but sure enough, he had left. I looked out the window and his car was gone too. I stayed up in bed for a few hours to wait for my mom to get home, and then told her everything that had happened. She seemed to believe me this time, as she also thought it was strange and really unprofessional to leave the house before she came home. The next day, she tried calling him, but he didn't answer. Eventually, though, she got a hold of her friend, who was Thomas's mom, and asked what happened, and she said that Thomas came home feeling sick. We both knew that was a lie and didn't make much sense, as he could have just called her and told her he wasn't feeling well. Anyways, it's been almost 10 years since all that happened, and I still find myself thinking about how weird that night was. I always wonder what the two were arguing about, why he left, and what was in the bag.